Yes, we got mentioned yesterday when Marco was referring to the fact that there is a solution out there which would allow for online voting, and the question was posed to Al Gore why it's not being used. But let me talk a little bit about Scytl and the way we see the world. So we heard a lot about technology, banking, security. We talk a lot about technology and health. But basically there's a way how we handle elections which is pretty much like our grandmothers and grandfathers still used to do. Voting today is still a very much paper-driven and traditional process. But paper voting has implications. Paper voting basically poses issues, and these issues are around accessibility. If you have lived in a foreign country, outside your home country, it is very difficult sometimes to get access to election papers. Secondly, obviously, for handicapped people, it's sometimes not that easy. The alternatives, postal voting and paper voting, obviously have some advantages, but they also have some issues. If you look at efficiency, for instance, around voting today with a paper-driven process, the average cost of voting per voter is between $5 and $15. These are United Nations numbers. If you do online voting, you can actually cut the cost by a scale of 10. So that is very important to take this into account. And one thing which is important, and it has a good reference with Al Gore, the reason André Rio, unfortunately the gentleman that founded the company, died in a car accident, but the reason he decided to found this company in 2001 was after the presidential elections in 2000, where Al Gore didn't win against George W. Bush Jr. because of Florida. Florida was a swing state, and there were 5,000 votes where the punch cards were not accurately printed, and it was unclear whether people had actually voted for Al Gore or George W. Bush. And basically, we believe, he believes that if that had been an online voting process, he might have been president at the time, which might have changed the course of history. Now, other examples of efficiencies, you may remember the presidential elections in Austria, where the presidential elections had to be repeated because there was some uncertainty about a couple of hundred votes. That efficiency issues you won't have with online voting. Transparency is very important. If you do postal voting, you send your letter, you never know whether it arrives, and anybody can actually do with it what he wants, because if you look at security, how do you know that the postal vote isn't being tampered with? Now, online voting actually allows for complete identification of the voter as such. The voter himself can check whether his vote has been properly casted, and then from an auditing perspective, you can see whether the number of votes will actually the same at the end of the voting process as the number of votes that actually have been casted at the beginning or during the voting day. So huge efficiency advantages and security advantages, as well as transparency. And you know these examples that we see on television where people are stuffing ballots into the ballot box, the so-called ballot box stuffing, obviously, which is possible with the paper voting and not possible with online voting. Now, simply to understand, 2001 was the founding of the company. The first 10 years, this was an academic project funded by family and friends, very much around security identification of the individual voter and giving access, and then protecting, finding out what the voters actually has voted for. The last 5 to 6 years have been much more about doing this on a wider scale, meaning allowing for complete verifiability. It's a very important term. Basically, the voter can check that his vote has been casted correctly, and he can check afterwards. And then an independent party can actually check. This is the universal auditability or verifiability. Basically allows for independent auditors to check whether the number of votes that have been casted during the day are actually equivalent to the number of votes that are being accounted for. Global election tech industry, we reckon it's about 25 billion annually. So if you sort of look at the amount of money which is put into infrastructure, as well as the training program of poll workers, you're talking somewhere between 40 to 50 million. I think Marco mentioned yesterday Kenya, right, which had some part of online voting already last year, but the entire project was a more than $100 million project, which was then obviously funded by international organizations. About 6 billion of the total budget is actually attributed to election tech. So election tech can be anything from online voting, what Scytl is doing, but also putting voting machines like in the US, right? Now, how's the evolution? There will be an election next year in Switzerland. Switzerland will allow for 100% online voting capabilities. So everybody who wants to vote online can do that in Switzerland. Ontario, Canada is going to online election next year. So 50% of counties are already allowing for online elections. So it's a huge adoption increase. That was about 11% 5 or 4 years ago. And if you look at Australia, who allowed for online voting in 2011, 2015, the people who had the possibility to vote online actually increased from 11% to around 55%. So huge adoption increases where people had possibilities. So why is Scytl the worldwide leader? First of all, we have a global footprint. We work with 30 countries worldwide. We have within the online voting space, we have an 85% market share. We have a very strong scientific background in cryptography. Basically, the founders and the key innovation drivers in the company, they're mathematicians. So we're holding more than 40 election-related patents. We're very closely connected to the European Commission in these type of projects. We have held more than 100,000 electoral events. And I think what is important, the Ministry of Education in France, for instance, which is a non-government political election, but a government institutional election, had more than 1.7 million online votes taking place. So, experience in 6 countries, right? We are able to deal with many different political systems. So when you look at the map, obviously it looks impressive, but basically all of these countries have gone through some type of online voting experience or election tech experience. Quickly, Switzerland, you know about Switzerland, very strong democratic culture, referendums taking place every couple of months with a lot of, obviously, infrastructure and cost attached to that. Swiss Post is a partner, basically a distribution partner of Scytl. Swiss Post understood very early on that they need to create a new business just next to the sort of postal business, and they have engaged with us in a technology projects. Basically, next year, through the Scytl technology, with obviously Swiss Post as the integration partner and the one dealing with the Swiss government, is going to allow for 100% online voting. And then you see a very good hockey stick, a pretty heavy IT project which we're undergoing at the moment with the Swiss, and then obviously, since we have a transaction-based model, is taking off in a very nice way. Our core really is security. The security standards we have to live up with, they're much, much higher than you would find anything in e-banking. I talked about transparency and the verifiability, basically allowing for independent people to take a look. Yeah, Switzerland will allow, in the test run, they will allow the global hacking community to hack online voting. Basically, there has never been any hacking possibility for outsiders to get into the system. What is confused in the general public is actually the fact what is happening before the vote, what is happening in social media, and actually what's happening during the online voting. Online voting is a highly secure and highly transparent process which can easily be followed. So, online voting is a game changer. Those countries that have used online voting, like Norway, they have seen voter participation going up, which we would call a stronger democratization. I already asked Marco to be in part of that team that can meet Mr. Altmaier, the Minister of Economics, Mr. Altmaier, basically because we think that we would like to get on the digital agenda of the German federal government and meet the people who could help to make this happen. We feel this is a much more inclusive democracy. Thank you very much.